It's a question that goes right back to my place of birth. They are in the Great Karoo. The world is so flat that you're born with vision. At about 12 years of age, two friends of mine, both sides, one Jacobson and one van Venter, we looked at the back of some comics, I can't remember which, and they advertised little blue books, Haldeman Julius, blue books in America. A long list, and you could mark in the little block what you're interested in. And I ordered a lot of books. I still have them. On the psychology side, things that interested me at that stage was the title, you know. Psychoanalysis Made Plain, Why Parsons Go Wrong, etc. Aberrations in the psyche. And I ordered all the books, and we wrote them a little note and said that, please, we haven't got money to pay, but we're young boys and we're interested. The books arrived. Then I started paging through the books, and my dear old mother got very worried because she saw stuff lying around. And on a certain morning when I got home, there was the Minister of Religion sitting in my room going through the books, and he had a whole stack of books on the one side. Because amongst the books on the psychology side was the essence of Talmud, essence of Confucianism, essence of Hebrew, essence of Hinduism, essence, all the religions of the world, the essence of such a book. And then there was ventriloquism, self-taught, and singing self-taught, etc. A whole lot of that type of books. And then the juicy ones is Scottish jokes and Irish jokes and medical jokes and no jokes about Parsons and so on. But the Minister of Religion asked whether he could take away all those books. So I said, no. You don't work during the week, so come and sit here and read the books if you want to read the books. I could see that my mother was very upset because she's a dear old lady. She looked at these books and she thought, I must check with some expert to tell me whether he should be allowed to read these books. Well, that's where my interest really started. And in those days, there was no such thing as occupational differentiation in a small little Karoo dorp. There was no career planning. There was no counseling, teaching, or any formal aspect of preparing children for any future. The medical doctor, you looked at it and you thought, But then you've got to go down to Cape Town, Haitties, English, not, because Pretoria did not exist for the people in the R. You can become an attorney. Now, you don't want to be called the local shark. You can become a teacher. The teacher says, listen, don't be stupid and waste your brains. It doesn't pay. Do something else. Anyhow, now you go, and you need money to go to university. The church says that if you follow a certain line, we can provide you with the funds. Off I go, Stellenbosch, the BA degree, theological admission with Hebrew, Greek, philosophy, Afrikaans, Netherlands. And I get to Stellenbosch, and suddenly the world opens up. I hear things that I've never heard before. Like mathematical statistics. So I went around and I had a relations of mine, a professor. His wife was a doctor in Afrikaans, Netherlands, and she was actually the family connection. But I went to him, and I spoke to him, and I said to him, I'm here, this is the background, but I feel that I would like to take physiology. I would like to take business economics. I would like to take statistical mathematical statistics. Is it possible? Not really, because in the end, there's a clash on the roster when you write exams and the one faculty and the other faculty. But you can take it sort of extra, but so eventually I got permission to take it extra. And instead of writing at the end of the year, I was allowed to join the July handicap in the next year. Those days, if you fail in a subject this, you're allowed to repeat it in the July handicap in the next year. So now, okay, that's all right. I can now write all my extra subjects, physical anthropology, biology, physiology, etc. I can write it next year in June. So now come the end of the year, now I go back and I said, I would like to go into the second year. You must first have, I said, but you said I must only write the exam next year. So they eventually allowed me to carry on with the second year, provided obviously that if I don't pass the first year in July, my second year is wiped off the board. I went through, eventually I got a BA degree. Because of my interest since 12 years in all these subjects connected to psychology, when I went to the psychology department to old Professor Jantjies van Rensburg, and I spoke to him and I said to him, I'm interested. And already I've been listening and I've put my ear to the ground and I've heard the word pastoral psychology. That sounded to me to be the thing that I'm really interested in. I don't want to stand and preach every Sunday. I want to work during the week. It's a pastoral psychology. So I went to the theological seminary, and there was an old professor, same surname, Van Rooyen. And I spoke to him, and when I mentioned the word pastoral psychology, he says, don't use those two words in the same breath. The pastoral practice is holy, etc., etc. And that lot of sensual rubbish that comes from Freud, I don't want to hear about it. So I thought, no, there's no such thing as having as pastoral psychology. So then I'll drop the pastoral and I'll go for the psychology. In the meantime, I got appointed as a sort of a student assistant. My pay was £9 something a month. And I assisted with all the practical work, first year, second year, third work, by laying out everything that has got to be laid out on the checklist and assembling again and putting back where it should be in the various laboratory shelves. And then I got roped into the Gestetner room with the old wax sheets, because Stellenbosch was very early on, followed the line where the lectures were prepared for all the years, printed, and then handed out as the students come to the class at that stage, first, second, third year, doesn't matter. You hand out next week's notes. And the notes for today's were handed out last week, and it's only open for discussion today. It's not dictation where you've got to write down the stuff. So I got in and I started, and that's how I landed in July 1948. And it was a very big decision for me to take, to go to Bloemfontein and assist the meeting, because I've been doing all the printing work at Stellenbosch, the preparatory work for actually what eventually amounted to the establishment of the South African Psychological Association, SAPA, and Bloemfontein. Now, the background to SAPA, that early in 1948, there was a movement on the medical society's part, wanting to have a degree, diploma in psychological medicine, that will give any MB-CHB medical man 120 hours of psychology, which will qualify him with a diploma in psychological medicine, which will allow him to practice to assist the neurologist and the psychiatrist. That was the sort of third leg of what they wanted to do. The psychology departments were cut out of this preparatory thing, but they got hold of all the background information that was circulating, and it was a meeting caused by the movement on the medical side that brought all the psychologist departments together at Bloemfontein. My big decision was not to go on tour with the Stellenbosch Boerorkest, but rather to go and assist and be the office jockey for this. Well, I got paid for it. And I stayed with an old aunt of mine in Bloemfontein. But that's where the psychology first became an organized body in the country. Present at that meeting was Professor I.D. McCrone of Wits, Professor Pratt Yule of Natal, Professor Jantjies van Rensburg of Stellenbosch, Professor Atle Gransie of Pretoria, Professor Hall, Cape Town, I think it was Hall, of Cape Town, Dr. Simon Bishiel from the Air Force Testing Center, whatever it was called in those days. And that's where the South African Psychological Association was established and formed with the work decision or the program is to stop the medical people from literally hijacking psychology for their own purposes. Now, I qualified eventually, BA. I walked out of the theological seminary, went back to the psychology department, and continued with the honors degree. At that moment, Stellenbosch had the split between general psychology into educational psychology, psychopathology, and industrial psychology. And I, together with Appels van Aarde, who later became professor of educational psychology at Portsmouth University, we were the first two to enroll in the psychopathology leg of specialization. And Professor A.B. van der Merwe, who had an MA psychology and who went and had his MB CHB from Cape Town, he was appointed as the professor to establish and to build up the psychopathology section. There was a lot of protest from the medical side about the title of that, psychopathology, on the basis that pathology is a word that belongs to the medical and not to the psychological field. So they wanted to have the name changed. When the name was suggested, eventually clinical psychology, the same protest came that said clinical is a word belonging in the medical side, not in the psychology side. But eventually, I then came up after my master's, and I'll talk about that because that's where the second time that I met up with Bishiel, or the first time that I really met up with him. But I came up, I was established in Anglo-Medical Corporation as the personnel psychologist of Anglo-American. Dr. Willem Nordea was established as the personnel psychologist of Union Corporation. Piet Morkel was established as the personnel psychologist of JCI. And then De Boer and one other, I can't remember, of each mining house now had a psychologist on its staff. And together, those psychologists with the NIPR that was established then formed the basis of the big research project establishing for the use of all the gold mining and eventually the coal mining, a system of classifying people on arrival at the mines into structuring them into various types or levels of jobs. We had 12 categories, which we called JUDECs, D-U-D-E-C-S, JUDECs. So we had from the clever boys, the JUDECs 1, up to number 12, the JUDECs 12, embargoed within the compound, not allowed to go outside the compound because they'll kill themselves. We were working at that stage with people from sub-Saharan countries coming into the gold mining industry. If I remember correctly, we had about 134 different language groups coming to the mines, bare feet. It was sometimes literally cruel to see when they fitted out with their studded boots and so on, how they stood there, they could not move, because this is the first time they had these heavy things on their feet. We established the aptitude testing center. My share of the project then became the development of a method of assessing amongst the top 4, JUDAC 1, 2, 3, and 4, among those ones with the potential of being the more brainy boys, of developing a system of sorting out amongst them with the best leadership abilities. I could speak German fairly fluently in those days. I had a psychological abstracts search, especially at Wits University, because the NIPR library was sort of classified, military secrets. You could not even touch the pink lint to open up the bundle. But I made contact with Professor Riefert. He developed a system for selecting in the Luftwaffe in Germany in 1931. He developed a system which later became known as leaderless group tests. And my doctorate was the local establishment of leaderless group tests and all the factors influencing the use of black leadership in the mining industry. And Biesheuvel was my examiner, and my external examiner was an ex-professor from Stellenbosch who at that stage was running the country, 1956, 57. Now, I went down for the final approval of the manuscript, and I came back. I went by road down from Springs, where I was established, to Cape Town, Stellenbosch. I came back. I drove all the way through. I had the family with me. I fell in bed, slept, to wake up the next morning to see that the whole window in the sitting room was taken out. It was plastered with elastoplaster and pushed in, and then the whole collapsible was taken out. My bag with the doctorate in it was missing. We ran an advertisement in the press, and the farmer from Heidelberg phoned me. He said he's been reading in the newspaper about this theft, and there's on the railway line down past his farm, there are papers lying there that looks like the sort of thing that we're looking for. So I took the staff of the aptitude testing center at Springs that did all the mines in that area, Daggafontein, East Dagga, Brakpan, Sallies. I took the staff members all down, and we went down, and in that area we picked up every piece of paper. Some places where the train ran over it and where you could not remove the flake from the line, they copied what was written there, and they copied what was written there. And it took me 2 years to reassemble that doctorate, to hand it in, and I got the doctorate in 1959 when I went to Tara Hospital. In the meantime, Simon Biesheuvel was on the executive of the Psychological Association, and I became the honorary secretary. We spent a fair amount of time, almost weekly, going from Johannesburg to Pretoria to see Mr. Barnard, who was at that stage the admin chief of the medical council. about the recognition of psychology, and as the executive made certain decisions, we had to go and negotiate again in Pretoria. And then eventually, I can't remember which Minister of Health eventually conceded, and they published in the Government Gazette a voluntary recognition of psychologists. Not clinical psychologists, no, only psychologists. They had to drop the word clinical to get past the protest of the medical society side. So now we were voluntarily registered, and we had to register. We could now go into practice. But conditions apply. The small print, we must go through Tara Hospital, and under Wits, Professor McCrone and Lejeune, we assembled, with the help of the psychiatrist, president of Psychiatry Association, Max Veldman, and the neurologist, Professor Rudolf Geerling. With their assistance, Tara Hospital was sort of raked up as the housemanship, 12 months at that stage, and we enrolled 4 people. Myself, Bram Coetzee, Arnold Lazarus, and Shirley Cohen. The 4 of us, we were first students doing our housemanship in psychology, because we were not allowed to call it clinical psychology. That was 1959. Now, at that stage, I was already past my doctorate. I left the mines because I had no further problem doing research on that side. And I was asking, actually, I asked Dr. Bishewell, I need, when after the theft of mine, I said to him, I now need time to sit and concentrate and put this thing together again. So he said, he'll appoint me as a research officer at NIPR, and all I come and do is I come and finish that part of the project. Now that was heaven on earth, because now you had library facilities, you had all the time, and we were given offices at Cottesloe, the old army barracks next to the Cottesloe Hospital, the mining hospital. And it was marvelous at the time, because we had all the facilities, we were at peace, and we had a very interesting man living in half the quarters, Dr. The name is right or White, ex-Chief Justice of Nigeria or Ghana, and for Wits to get hold of his total library, they gave him offices and living quarters, and he worked from there, and he was our next door neighbor. So 10 o'clock in the morning, it was Kasawa time, we stopped working, and we sit together in the tea room, and he tells us what goes on in Africa, which we don't know from that stage down here. It was a very interesting time. I was in the meantime appointed at UNISA to start establishing at UNISA a course in industrial psychology as well as in clinical psychology. The word clinical was cleared in 1959 when we started at Tara Hospital. It was cleared, I think, due to the help, if I'm not mistaken, by Professor Dr. Karel de Wet, who was the Minister of Health, who said to the Medical Society, listen, stand aside. Stand aside. This is the future, and these people could work with the neurologist and the psychiatrist, and they don't need your help. That was to get rid of the previous condition that you are only allowed to accept the patient through the medical man referring a patient to you, but the medical man refused to work with the scholar, and that overcame that problem. So we were then, established. I was at University of South Africa, and I asked permission to establish, for the purpose of keeping my hand in bit of rationalization. For the purpose of keeping my hand practically in the game, I opened up probably the first practice in Van Riebeeck Medical Buildings, Pretoria Street, in Pretoria, as a clinical psychologist. Again, there were protests from the rest. What is this man doing here? It's like the protest in Parliament when a man lands in the wrong place. Everything stops and they throw him out. So, but with the help again of Rudolf Geerling, who is probably what does one call it? The godfather. The godfather of South Africa, Professor Rudolf Geerling. He went back to them and said, listen, you're behind the times. This man is recognized. That's what it stands in the government gazette. So stop your nonsense. Then came 1960. I was still the secretary, honorary secretary. Michel was still the chairman of the executive. And at one of the first senior students I had when I joined University of South Africa was a man by the name of Ben McQuatley. And Ben McQuatley qualified and got his master's degree. And I actually enrolled him and admitted him as a full member of the South African Psychological Association. At the same time, Albino from Natal University, Albino was a sort of follow-upper of Professor Pratt Yule. He said, I must send him some forms because they've just appointed Professor Ramphal at the University of Western Indian College, whatever. And they enrolled him as a full member to draw him in to the branch, where he's then a full member in the branch. So Ramphal and McQuatley got onto the books as full members. Came the annual general meeting at Stellenbosch in June 1961, and Biesheuvel's presidential report published, handed out. There were serious objections on the part of Professor Hatting, of Potch, about the fact that he wants to query the new members list because there are two names there which they can't find out where these people, the people came from. The one was McQuatley and the one was Ramphal. So I had all the papers, and he said to me, so you took it upon yourself to enroll these people as full members. I said, yeah, I took it upon myself because part of my job was to interpret the constitution of the Psychological Association. And there's nothing in the constitution. It says if a man has a degree at master's level or higher from any of the following qualified situations in the country, he is a full, he is entitled to full membership. Yeah, but I should have known better. I said, no, I only know what the Constitution tells me. You want to change the situation, then you change the Constitution. They asked for an adjournment, and later in the afternoon they met again, and they said they're still not, now this is now Potch, and Professor R.S. Roux of UNISA, and one or two other people who were so-called, that's a nasty word, who were accepted as psychologists because they were teacher psychologists or Department of Labor psychologists, qualified psychologists. They haven't had time yet to prepare a proper memorandum to put amendment to the Congress or the annual general meeting. They asked for time until the next day. So it was granted. That evening, or late that afternoon, they went through to Cape Town and they saw the big boss, Dr. Faro. I call him Faro. Verwoerd. And he, who used to be a professor in psychology, Stellenbosch, he said, no, there must be, the government is clear, the policy is clear. There must be separate associations for whites, blacks, Asians, and colours. So they came back the next morning and they put an amendment to the annual general meeting saying that we must handle the situation the executive must handle the situation very carefully. They started off by saying that they must express their disagreement and their disappointment with Bisjewel and myself for having taken it upon us to allow a contravention of what is clearly known as government policy. But their proposal is that we reverse the situation very carefully and we assist Ramphal and Mokwatle to establish an Asian Psychological Association and a Bantu Psychological Association. Now, in the process, I flared up because I was speaking English, and Hatting from Potchefstroom says, could I please translate that into Afrikaans? And I flared up and I said, this is a bilingual country. Do your own dirty work. Words to that effect, which was nasty. I also flared up when in a discussion against Professor R.S. Roux. And I quoted one or two things, personal things that I know. I said, you can't have tea with a senior student like Mokwatle in your office. What is that? Is it social mixing? You're the professor, he's the student. But the moment he qualifies and he gets your degree, you're not allowed to meet with him in a scientific situation. That was the end. They broke away. They lost the count. They broke away that night and established the Suid-Afrikaanse Instituut, the SIRSA. It became known as SIRSA. The SIRSA consisted of Potchefstroom and Roux of Unisa. And then they intimidated people like Schmidt from Bloemfontein and Sleebusch from. They said, you have government jobs. If you don't see clear, your way clear to come and join us. And what was left in the African Psychological Association, it became a split between English and Afrikaans, literally. There were a few of us, like myself, Davie Gous, Davie Forster. Well, that was in a NIPR situation. And Willem Rodier, the mining and the private people, they said to SIRSA, sorry, we're staying within the Psychological Association. And who also stayed with us in the Psychological Association, and as a result, I think he more or less lost his job through it, was Dio Stroomfer at Potchefstroom University, because he remained within, and he and Rita Kellerman, I think they remained with Psychological Association. And that was 61. I got back in Pretoria. I was called in to the office of the big boss of Unisa and said that it is with great disappointment that he has learned of my insubordination against the head of the psychology department, and as a result, they've put on ice all the planning of the developments of a department of the, applied psychology, which I was due to head up in, my understanding was in beginning of 1962. So I said, well, I admit that I've done it. I admit that I follow the Constitution. I admit that I don't see my way clear to discriminate against people who as a student was sitting at my feet, and because he qualified, I can't mix with him. It's not for me. Yeah, but then I must just note that all the plans for 1962 has been put on ice. There's no promise about any further developments. It meant to me that, okay, I will now just have to take it on the chin, walk out. I called together, I was the assistant president of the Teachers Association of UNISA, die Docentenvereniging. I called Professor Lombard, who was the president of the Teaching Staff Association. I said to him, this has happened. He called an urgent lunchtime meeting at UNISA, and he said to me, well, tell everybody what's happened. So I told everybody what's happened. And I also said that, you know, I have reached this point, I'm closing the gate, no further academic future or career for me. I'm going fully onto the applied side, and I have given my resignation in this morning with immediate effect. I'm not serving any period. I am not responsible for any further work that's in progress or lectures that's half done. It's out. I'm walking out now. I went over to Johannesburg. By now, Bissiewel has moved from the NIPR to the African Breweries as Director of Human Resources. So I went to Bissiewel. When I got to Bissiewel's office, he said to me, welcome. So I said, what do you mean, welcome? He said, I know what happened to you. You start on our books tomorrow. You're appointed to look after all the brewery manpower developments in Central Africa, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, in those days with other names. And you're stationed at Salisbury as your headquarters. So I said, thank you very much. I went home. I said to Yvonne, my children, I said, pack up. She said, where are we going? I said, no, we're going to Rhodesia. What are we going to do there? I said, I'll tell you on the way. So we went up. I bought a plot in Salisbury, and I started doing what was literally later called Africanization program, of taking a long-term view into the future and doing a complete assessment of what we have and doing an assessment within the country of what sort of born Zambians and what born Zimbabweans are available. And to give you an idea of what happened in Zambia, when we went through all the information, there was something like 84 matriculated or higher Zambians qualified in 4 million people. There were about 2,000 qualified and graduated blacks working in Zambia. But those blacks came from here because here the gate was closed due to work reservation and so on, and they drifted there where it was open occupational situation. I completed the work in the first 3 years. I brought my old colleague from Tara, Bram Kutsia, up and stationed him in Salisbury when that was running, the Zimbabwe side. And I still stayed in Salisbury, but I worked Zambia and Malawi. And in Malawi in those days, when you book into a hotel, because of the bickering that went on, I booked in and where it says country of residence, I put USA. And I thought if ever they challenge me, I'll say it's the Union of South Africa. Because if you admit that you come from South Africa, then you're in trouble with people haggling here. When I went to Zambia, I had a very interesting situation because I was now carrying a South African passport, a Rhodesian residence certificate, and the Zambian diplomatic immunity certificate. So going into an airport, you must just remember exactly which pocket to produce a document. And I did the Africanization program in preparation for the establishment of a separate unit, Zambia Railways. At those stage, at the beginning, when the Central African Federation broke up, the Rhodesian Railways, the corporate body, belonged 100% to the British government. It was a British-owned government company. So now you've got to split it, and my assignment is I must split it between the various constituent countries without losing a day's running of the railways. It must be, I must keep the railways running and do all the preparatory work. It was really a marvelous situation. And it took us about 3 years to get to that point. Then followed UDI in Salisbury, and then the world started closing in. Zambia embarked on a nationalization program. They take half your shares. You keep on running the company, and over the next 10 years, out of your profits, they reduce your tax in order to pay for half the shares, which at book value, 10 years ago, they took from you. That was the system of stealing your property. So that came to a close. Then I moved back to Johannesburg. My children by then, in English schooling, they could speak their home language, Afrikaans. They couldn't read or write it. They were fully double languaged, not bilingual, switching from the one to the other, but absolutely automatically. If they speak to an English people, they speak English. Speak to Afrikaans, they speak Afrikaans. They just knew. I moved back here, and I set up in Market Street, number 67, in the Volkskas building. I opened offices in the Volkskas building. Then Andre Pons got thrown out of Zambia. It's like our cleansing efforts here, where they attack foreigners and said, "Get out of the country." He was then stationed. I put him there, my colleague. He was then stationed in Zambia, but they said to him, "You must move and put a black man in his place." So he moved. When he came back here, then we bought Oxford Street, number 51, and set up office there. It had a sort of office suite on the one side, and he lived in the house. I went down to Stellenbosch, and I bought a little farm outside Stellenbosch, and I set up office in Stellenbosch and Johannesburg. If my book is full, I'll fly up, work my 16, 18 hours, fly back, take off my shoes, and start making wine. I've planted vines, and I start making wine. I started an international group of psychologists and we called ourselves Leermeester Consortium. I was doing work for the textile industry in Austria, and I was doing work for the Rijkswacht in Belgium, and then I met one or two people at Neuchâtel in Switzerland, and from that grew the idea of putting up a consulting practice, which we called Leermeester Consortium. And I had local qualified psychologists, and then we had people in Australia, people in New Zealand, and all handpicked because we knew the people. So we set up Leermeester International as a trading name, with the company being Leermeester Consortium, and each one, like a franchise, was running its own office, but we are combining and we are exchanging information. Now, I've published very little in my life because most of the work I've done belonged to the people that I did the work for. When I start developing a certain system, personnel system, the copyright goes to South African breweries or to Rhodesia Railways, yeah, or to this, or to Old Mutual, or to Coronation. It's their system. I've developed it for them. It's not mine. I can't go and publish it. The only time I went overseas was to give, out of my doctorate, to give 2 lectures. I can't even remember what it stands for. BACIE, B-A-C-I-E. BACIE was some sort of educational setup. And what I went to talk to them about was a part of my doctorate which was thrown out as superfluous, need not be included in the final copy. Now, looking back, it's quite interesting because that whole chapter dealt with a project that I completed in the mining industry, designing an interview technique of getting personal information out of people where you go through the Induna as your interpreter to the man sitting there and to pick up. It's a very laborious way of picking up, but basically measuring his attitudinal setup, which later in this country became known as verkramp verlig. And we established and worked out the correlation to show that the more verkramp, the longer it takes him to become economically active past the 50% level of assessment in the work situation. That chapter was thrown out, superfluous, because they probably at that stage, the big external examiner decided that this is to cut across whatever they were trying to do. For me to come and say that if a man has got no second thoughts about allowing his brother to marry out of the tribe, if he can eat out of the same pot with his hand, but the other one can't. No, you don't do it. No, my daughter must never marry this or that out of the tribe. Now, verkramp. It could show the linear relationship between his attitudes and the time it took him to get economically active. All I can tell you is that Stellenbosch never announced the names of the examiners. Now, my suspicion came from something Biesiewers said. Because Biesiewers' recommendation, mind you, he was biased my way now. I did a project, and it was a project that had great ramifications throughout the industry, not only in the gold mining industry, but generally. And the fact that I analyzed not only the selection of people with leadership ability, but all the pertaining conditions affecting the effectiveness of the man. In those days, you were a good busboy, which is your foreman in the stope or in the haulage. If, after hours, you prepared to come and work in my garden, wash my car, and do all the dirty work around the house over the weekend, seeing that you would otherwise just sit in the compound and drink beer. Now, if you do that, you're a good boy. You're a good busboy. Now you come and you take a man, a cold blood selection, you send him to the miner or to the shift boss. It's not his choice. So he sends him back at the end of the day and he says, this man is absolutely useless. Now we primed some of our lecturers in the training center and we say, okay, tomorrow you go down to Shorty Rousseau's haulage and you replace the man which he sent back today, which he says is a useless man. But you make sure you make such a balls up of a situation that tomorrow night he comes back and he says, take this man, I'll kill him if he comes back. Where's that one I had yesterday? He's miles better than this one. Now, we used to call that sielkunde, you see. If you, as a qualified young psychologist, come to me today, the first thing I will tell you is, find yourself a job overseas. Get out. Psychology, like architecture, is subject to flimsy conditions pertaining today. You've got no long-term security. Number one, get out. But if you ask me, what must I tell somebody who's interested in getting qualified in psychology? I will say, there is no, according to my thinking, there is no proper psychological training available in this country and not in the world outside that I know of. My model for development of psychology, applied psychology, that you start off by doing at your bachelor's degree stage a course in clinical psychology. That you learn to work with people that high, in all its variations that you find. Now, if you are a good qualified clinical psychologist, and my model is clear, you're now a GP in psychology. If you are a good GP in psychology, then you can enroll for an in-depth further degree in educational psychology. Then you can go and apply what you know about the individual into the educational field. Or you can then go and take a diploma in industrial psychology and go and work in the workplace. But be a psychologist first. Then you can go and specialize in that, or in the educational and in industrial. That's my answer. I tried to propagate that sort of idea years ago, but against vested interests. One man, outside the zeitgeist, if the time is not right, nobody is prepared to even to listen. So, I think back at the NIPR, two things stand out. Firstly, Bishop was terribly interested that should you, in the smallest fraction, discover something by innovation or by rethinking an issue, make it public, firstly around the tea table, secondly at the next proceedings, publish something, even if it's half a page, let it stand in the proceedings of the South African Psychological Association. And if you look back through all the numbers of proceedings, you'll see that I'm guessing, but more than half of all the articles emanated from the NIPR. From research in the very wide field, from Kwasi Hokor through to Jetta Glass, to Mundy Castle, to Roining, to Robinson, to Skippers on the biometric side. It's all there. That's where I lost out in a sense, because the work that we were doing was classified. Anglo-American had a clause that you're not allowed to divulge information gained in applying your work here in this. It belongs to them. So, apart from that aspect, we were living in a pioneer stage of development, and it was very easy for people to be called upon. The ethical standards in those days was, thou shalt not advertise. And coming in from the outside into the realm of professional practice, we were looked upon like, I'm watching you, you see. I'm watching you, watch out. Don't you contravene any ethical regulations. So that whatever we did was by word of mouth. We were not allowed to advertise. And if you write an article, you don't mention the fact that you're a psychologist. You put down your name, your interest, sometimes not even your degrees. You just publish under the name. The other aspect is that the variation of how we literally pioneered psychology, starting from the research in the air, zeitgeist of doing research in industry like the big mining project, that led to a lot of things. For instance, the medical legal work that we pioneered by doing research, by getting to the point where the court accepted psychological evidence with reliability and validity coefficients above the of the psychiatric fraternity, saying that I thought this man, and I got the impression this man. We did a lot of work, but it all stemmed from that approach to establish your facts, which we learned in the NIPR. The value of psychology has never been realized because the people that should have more knowledge never get that far in practical development of skills, psychological skills. The first psychological skill, you must keep your ears open, your mouth shut. The second one is read between the lines, not on the lines. The third one is don't think you have any right to intervene in another person's life unless he opens up the gap and says, please help me. So the parsons, the teachers, even the medical practitioners, anybody working with people should have some basic skills in listening and in trying to fathom. There are interesting things you can tell as little stories. The little boy got home and he says, Mommy, where do I come from? She says, ask your daddy when he comes home. Daddy, where do I come from? Young, I'm busy, I'm tired, I've had news. Ask your mother. Daddy, Papa, lunch or rather supper? Where do I come from? Okay, son, take it easy. Now, starting with the birds and the bees, long history, his mouth opens up. When in the end they gave birth to this new little boy, he says, Christ, that's funny. The new boy in my class comes from Kimberley. Don't answer unless you've listened and you understand what the question is. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't superimpose. And I thought really the therapeutic world is full of superimposition. If this is my little belief, my school of thought, that is what I push. I think people should be much broader. They should be more dispensers of psychological service with shells of problems, of solutions, which they can mix, knowing what the problem is, a little bit of that therapy, put it together and say, okay, we will try this first. Not hammer down an avenue, because that's the avenue you know. That's it.